Okay, let's start with a question. How many of us went to business school when we started up in business?
I expect there won't be a particularly large show of hands.
No, and that's because most of us decided to go into business just doing something that we love, or maybe something that we're really good at doing.
It's usually a little way down the line that we start to reflect on not actually gaining a grounding in the useful things like sales, marketing, finance and operations.
Yeah, and that's when it all starts to feel, well, a bit difficult.
I'm Nicky. I've been running businesses since 2004, and I'm the founder of the Growth Community, which is a place where businesses come to network and support each other's business success.
And I'm James, and I started my business back in 2020, helping businesses, brands and organisations to unlock the power of podcasting, basically using audio as a way to market and grow their business.
Well, in our line of work, we both meet a lot of businesses and we're constantly learning new things from being around them. Every day literally is a business school day.
So we thought, why not grab some of this good stuff and turn it into a podcast? So please take your seats. Class is about to start. So today, Nicky, we are talking about... Well, we're talking about serious stuff. We're talking about financial stuff. We're kind of talking about how not to end up in prison.
Well, yeah, that would be a good start, wouldn't it? But actually, financial stuff is probably some of the things that a lot of businesses find the scariest. I think people who come into business kind of know, they either kind of come from a marketing and sales background or they're a bit more kind of money orientated, but you don't seem to find many people who can do both well. So I think it's really important to have, so if you're not good with your numbers, you need to have the right person around you to help you with that side of your business because it's such an important part. I know it's certainly something that I find scary. Well, today we've got Michael Harle with us from Prosper Accountancy because he knows a thing or two about numbers. So, Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, guys. So my name is Michael Harle. I am Director of Prosper Accountancy and we help our clients to stay on the right side of HMRC and Companies House.
Because HMRC is a bit scary, let's be honest, isn't it? Nobody wants to speak to HMRC.
It can be.
One of the things that I realised quite early on is that there's lots of things that you've got to pay. There's always people asking for money. Top of the list, pay your tax. Get your tax paid. Because if you've got a client or a supplier who's chasing you for an invoice, that's fine. HMRC aren't going to mess around with you either. Like, if you owe them money, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, there's the old adage of pay your tax, pay your telephone, pay your electricity, everything else, well, we can organise that and we can work with people. But tax, it has to come at the top of the list because HMRC, they will work with you, but they will also not work with you if you ostrich things and bury that head in the sand.
Fair enough.
So I think with this side of things, I think a lot of people don't really understand tax and they don't really understand a lot of this stuff. And they kind of start off in business and it's just kind of like, oh, get some sales and survive. But actually, it's really important early on, I think, to understand the whole tax thing and what you should do with it. Because I think there's this kind of misunderstanding that actually all the money you earn is yours, because sadly it's not. So I think it'd be really useful to know what should we be doing with our tax money. You know, I have a view that I always say I don't own my tax money. You know, I make sure that money is not mine, and I don't and I put it away so that it never feels like mine.
You sound like Father Ted. You're saying the money was just resting in my account before I paid my tax bill.
But it's true, isn't it? I think it's getting that mentality early on.
There is, and it's the adage as well that any money that you collect, be it VAT, be it money that you need to pay over for pay-as-you-earn, corporation tax self-assessment, all that you're really doing is collecting that money for and on behalf of HMRC. And then at some point, at the relevant payment dates, then you're going to distribute it back to HMRC.
Yep.
There's many of my clients who what they actually do is they've got their trading bank accounts, but then what they've also got is they've got tax accounts. Right. So they have got an account set aside for VAT, an account set aside for maybe payroll or the personal tax, which may not be due until quite some time down the line, because that's where some people do get caught out. It's the case of, okay, I'm good for now, but are you good for 12 months' time when you've got a personal tax bill and you don't necessarily know what it is just yet?
Absolutely, because you look on your bank account and you think, oh, there's some money there. And then you check to see what your next tax bill is. And because they have a very complicated way of working this out, don't they? With like, was it payment on account or whatever it is? Where
Payments on account.
They
Right.
just make up numbers, I think. And so you're like
it.
oh, I've got to pay that in July. That's a lot of money. So actually, this big bank balance that I think I've got, and it's never been big, let's be fair, but this bank balance that I've got, and I'm like, actually, I've got to take all that off. And it can, if you are not on top of it, I think it could catch people out quite a lot.
It can, and I don't really need to get into the whys and wherefores of how payments on account get calculated here and now.
They make it up. They make it categorically. They just make it up.
So
I'm sure there is an equation.
There is some logic behind it, but yeah, as you say there, James, there are payments which are due in January. There are payments which are due in July, depending on how much you've earned, depending on the different year-end dates, etc. So it is important to understand that. So even if you're not a maths person or a finance person, if you are in business, it's really, really important to have some sort of level of basic understanding as to what the money in your bank account is, what is yours, what might be somebody else's, be it suppliers, be it taxes, so that you know what you can actually do. And that's where hopefully we as advisors, as accountants, can come in and guide and support people with that.
Let's start with something really basic in terms of, in my head, if you're starting in business, there's probably two main routes. One is to be a sole trader, which I guess most people will class that as self-employed. And then the other is to set up a limited company and you be the only employee of it at the beginning, assuming that people are kind of starting and it's just them. So before they're kind of getting into the sort of the growth and taking people on. What from a tax and I guess from a more general accounting point of view, what's the main difference then between those two routes? Does one leave you better off than the other?
It depends, which is a very political answer.
That's a very accountant
It's a
answer.
very accounting answer. Generally speaking, the bigger you are as a business, then the more efficient it may be to be a limited company.
Yeah.
But I do generalize there. If somebody is going into business by themselves, there's de minimis limits where if you're turning over more than £1,000, you need to register as self-employed. So at that point in time, you need to push the button and at least go self-employed. If you have aspirations where we want to build and we want to grow a business and we want to bring staff in and we're going to hit VAT registration thresholds or certain turnover limits or certain profitability levels, then at that point in time, then you might want to be considering a limited company as well.
Okay, that makes sense. In terms of how those things handle your tax affairs, what are the differences? And I ask this as someone, I'm self-employed, I'm a sole trader, have been since I started, and there's been various points where people have said to me, oh, you should really become a limited company for this reason and for that reason. And it's like you pay a bit less on that, but then you pay a bit more on that, and you're able to do this and you're able to do the other. So in your words, what are the differences?
Yeah, so as a self-employed individual, as a sole trader, you would calculate your accounts at the end of the year, you make a profit, and you as an individual pay tax and national insurance thereon.
Yep.
It is as simple as that, and then that would be reported on a personal tax return. Where you have a limited company, the limited company itself is a separate business entity. So you have your limited company and then you have yourself. So then generally what would happen is the limited company would make a profit, the limited company would pay corporation tax, and then there's an amount of money which is left in the business, which can then be distributed as dividends. Those dividends would then go on your personal tax return, and then you as an individual would then pay personal tax on those dividends.
Okay, so depending what kind of numbers you're playing with, it can be more efficient to do one, but probably more complicated than the other. I've always stuck with being a sole trader because it's just dead simple. I kind of, I can sort of predict if I sell something how much of it I'm going to pay in tax, because it's more or less 20%. It's pretty straightforward. There's nothing too complicated about it. All right, that makes sense. Where does VAT enter the equation?
So VAT enters the equation when your turnover of the business is going to be more than £85,000 per year. So at that level, you are obligated to register for VAT. Depending on your business type, there's certain caveats as to whether or not certain types of income is included within that £85,000. But generally speaking, most businesses are going to be obligated to register for VAT if your turnover is more than £85,000 per year.
And that's within a rolling 12-month period, isn't it? Because
yes,
I think that
correct.
catches people out. They get their accounts back at the end of the tax year and kind of think, oh, I'm away from that. But it's something you've kind of got to be aware of all the time, because if you are getting close to it, then it's time to kind of start chatting to someone about it.
Yeah, that's correct. So it is always best to know what your turnover is at any one point in time, because as you say there, it is in a rolling 12-month period. So we take month 1 to 12, then we take month 2 to 13, 3 to 14, so on and so forth. And if you're even not at the VAT threshold, but you're climbing towards it and you know you may breach it, then these are the sort of times that you need to be having more proactive conversations with your accountant as to what the implications of that are for you.
I think that's quite an important thing as well, because I think a lot of people start a business and think, especially if they start as a sole trader, think, I don't need an accountant because I can put my personal tax return in and, and I can more or less work that out. Job done. So if you're a limited company, that's a different thing. You do need obviously more input. But what would you say? In my opinion, I think you need an accountant from day one, because obviously accountants have access to knowledge that we don't have. And as a business, there's lots of things that you can claim for that you perhaps don't realise you can claim for and stuff like that. So, what are your thoughts on at what point you need an accountant in this mix?
Certainly from my side, as you say there, Nicky, you don't necessarily need an accountant, and anybody can go to HMRC's website and submit their own tax return. But if you've ever been to HMRC's website and tried to navigate it, it can be a bit of a minefield. So we do have a number of sole trader clients who they quite easily could prepare their own tax return, but they want that peace of mind. They want to know that somebody who is trained, who is qualified, who has got a number of years' experience within the industry is doing it on their behalf, and they don't need to worry about it. So they're not necessarily paying for a tax return, they're paying for the peace of mind and the fact that they can sleep at night without worrying about it.
Yeah, because it is not an easy thing to calculate, and I think also it's much more complicated than the things you can get access to in terms of saving money on things, can't you? There's tax relief that perhaps you don't understand as a business owner. But also, I think going back to a subject we've talked about quite a lot in this podcast about working smarter rather than harder. It's about actually not trying to do the things that isn't your core skill, isn't it?
Exactly. If it takes you 2 days to do your own tax return, and it will cost you a few £100 if you're a fairly simple, sole trader who's not registered for VAT, for example, to pay an accountant to do it, you kind of think, is it really worth your time doing that? For anything, if it takes you X amount of time to do it, but you can pay someone else to do it for less than your time is worth, I hope I'm explaining that right. Then
time is money.
You've really got to question the logic into why would you put yourself through that. For me, it's just knowing, well, I'm not going to prison for another year because I haven't ballsed this up. If someone else has ballsed it up, then we'll figure that out. But you kind of trust that they won't do. And it does. I don't know about your particular pricing, Michael, but for me, it wasn't as expensive as I thought it was going to be to get an accountant. And you just think, why did I not do this from the very beginning? Because the first year I did figure out my own tax return and did it. And I still think now, I'm fairly certain there were bits of that were wrong. I just guessed at a few things. There's some boxes where it's and what is your such and such? And I'm I don't even know what that means. So
There's a lot of boxes like that on HMRC's website, I find. But actually taking that a step further, a lot of accountants now, because people are, most people are gravitating across to using cloud-based accountancy systems now, which, it is, a lot of people have been quite resistant to seeing that. And I have to say, I did actually, get onto Xero quite early, but probably not as early as I should have done. And when I moved to it, it was just this total light bulb moment of going, oh my God, I've been sitting here trying to calculate VAT returns and all kinds of stuff for like ages, when actually I can now press a button and it just does it all for me and submits it to HMRC's systems. It's
mad,
incredible, isn't it?
Anyone doesn't do that now, because I've also used Xero pretty much from day one, and then there's this phrase that's been knocking around for years, which is making tax digital, and I thought, I better get on top of what that means. And it turns I'm already doing all the things that you do in order to do it digitally. And so I was just like, what, you mean there's people not doing that? There's people still keeping, like, I don't know, an Excel
sheets, yeah.
And my was like, there's people that still write it down in like A4 folders and stuff like that, and calculate their own VAT return, like on Xero to do your VAT return. It's just click, send. You don't even see the numbers, do you? You just get an email that just tells you this is how much you've got to pay, and you just kind of trust.
And it's easy, isn't it? Because you can, as you're on the go, you can be putting your receipts straight on through your phone and all that stuff. Now you haven't got like boxes of receipts anymore and all that kind of thing. Is there a particular digital cloud-based system that you recommend for businesses, or are they all much the same?
So we are a Xero partner. We're Xero advocates. We do also work with other software such as a free agent, such as a QuickBooks, which you guys will have heard of. But Xero is my go-to in most circumstances. Obviously, there's a small cost involved, but like anything, you place the value of your time versus your money. Yeah. As you were mentioning before there, it's you engage your accountant to do a tax return because that's an administration task that you don't want to do, which is the same reason that we've got a cleaner or we've got somebody to come and mow the lawn, because we don't want to do it and we can do something more valuable with our time, be it even more work or spend some time with the kids.
And I think that brings us on to something that I think is quite important, and I know you feel quite strongly about this, and I know I feel quite strongly about this, is that accountants were not all created the same, and there is almost like two camps of accountants in my mind. There's the accountants that you send in your accounts at the end of the year and they do them and they send you back all this stuff on Excel, and you kind of stare at it all and go, I think I made a profit, don't really understand a lot of that stuff, got a clue what the hell was going on or what I could have done differently. And there's the accountants who are more real time, the ones who are actually talking to you about all this stuff all the year round, rather than you just getting the set of accounts that goes, well, that's what you did, rather than what you could do. And I think the cloud-based systems really support that process, don't they? Because you can see it from your side as well as my side, so you can create this kind of real-time accountancy advice, can't you, for businesses?
You can, and what that proactivity means is throughout the year, then you've got a broad idea as to where we're going to end up at the end of the year, so you can start and plan with that and have those proactive conversations throughout the year. The worst thing that I, as an accountant, don't like is when it's lastminute.com and then somebody comes to you 2 or 3 days before a deadline. You need to prepare some accounts, and then all of a sudden you've got a corporation tax bill, you've got a personal tax bill, and it's due in 4 days. Yep. There was one I dealt with a couple of years ago where a person approached me a few days before a deadline, and then their personal tax bill was £180,000.
Wow.
Now, all of a sudden, you've got to find that money in less than a week. And that's a massive, huge, life-changing amount of money. And if you haven't planned for that, then you're going to be in trouble in a hurry.
You mentioned the phrase something to do with ostriches earlier. That's a perfect example of that.
Classic
isn't it? Like,
ostrich.
It costs you £180,000 to stick your head in the sand for 11 months of the year. Just mind blowing that people do that. But
essentially, they've been living beyond their means, haven't they? That's like spending all of your money when it wasn't your money to have in the first place, was it? I mean, and that's going back to what we said at the beginning: is that what you earn is not all of your money. if you charge VAT, then first thing you do is take that off immediately. You don't mess around. The VAT man's even more scary than like the general tax man. So, you deal with that straight away. You never have that money because that absolutely is not your money. It never was, I mean, yes, you can reclaim a little bit of it, but it's better to have more money set aside and go, oh, hooray, I've got a few extra quid, than to actually just try and work it out yourself. So I am really strict on VAT. The VAT has to be removed every month immediately.
That's easier, isn't it? Because you add VAT on, like this is what I charge, and then you add the VAT on, so kind of how much of it is actually yours. But of course, not all of that is yours, and that's when it does become a little bit of a guessing game, doesn't it? Where you kind of think, all right, some of that's going to go in tax. It's not actually all mine, but you don't know what the exact figure is, but you do know the exact figure for VAT.
Yeah.
It's quite easy to kind of like either filter that off into a separate account.
And this is where it comes back to having your regular conversation with your accountant, because at least I don't know how often, you'll be able to say better, but however regularly you choose to speak to your accountant through the year, whether that's monthly or quarterly or whatever it is, or weekly for some people maybe, you can keep an idea on where that tax is, what corporation tax is looking like and things like that. So you can start to, at least estimate putting, like you say, some money aside into a tax account so that you aren't looking at that money and going, oh, that's all mine, because it's not your money. And, like you say, if you suddenly get a bill for 180,000, that's ridiculous. But where are you going to find that from if you've already spent it?
And we go back to that proactivity in speaking to your accountant. So a question that I quite often ask clients is, what do you need? So what do we need to live on per week, per month? And what do we want? And you quite often find that in the beginning, before there's some education piece, they might be going with the living on what do they want rather than what do they need and what the business is making at any one point in time. Now, by no stretch am I here to tell anybody off about how they run their own lifestyles, but when somebody comes and says, I can't afford my tax bill, and then you look at their lifestyle and they've been on multiple holidays and then they've got some brand new cars and they've got a house which maybe they can't quite afford, then maybe there needs to be a little bit of a reality check from time to time.
Let's talk about, I've sort of jokingly said that this is about staying out of prison, which of course I don't believe HMRC just throw people in prison for not paying their tax bill straight away. But I think this is the bit of all of this that may well keep people up at night, just a bit worried, which is that thought of the brown envelope dropping through the door, the tax investigation, something where, I don't know, you've done something wrong, or you realise that you've maybe been a little bit liberal with yourself in terms of what you've maybe kind of claimed for and stuff like that. I've never had that, but I have. When I first registered for VAT, the nature of the work that I do meant that I could go back through, I think it was 4 years worth of stuff that I'd bought, and if I was still using it, I could claim the VAT back on it. So it was like one of the best things I ever did. I had a bumper month there, reclaiming everything. But HMRC, unsurprisingly, weren't very happy about it. So they were incredibly thorough about wanting to check everything and see every receipt and see lots of things. At some point, I think they were asking me to actually send like photographs of the things to prove that they existed and that I was still using them and stuff like that. And they were fine, actually. And in the end, there were a couple of things where they're like, we're not quite sure about this, we're just going to pay it. And they were pretty good. But it does scare people, doesn't it? That idea of at some point you might have either a query from HMRC, a full investigation, something. I'm guessing you deal with them quite regularly. What are they actually like? Should people be scared of HMRC in the way that I think most people are?
I don't think you need to be scared in the way that most people are of HMRC, in as much as every time I get a letter, HMRC is out to do me over or do me wrong or something like that. Dare I say they are human. You can actually speak to them, but I think from both levels there needs to be a level of honesty with the advisor as to what has actually happened genuinely, and also being able to be honest with the amount of receipts that you're actually putting through the business. Some of the claims that I've seen can be liberal, to say the least. At times, it's about protecting people from themselves.
Yeah.
So when they decide that everybody in their family's iPhone is going to be considered to be a business telephone, and we're going to run all of those through the books and records. Well, maybe, no, that's not the case. And maybe we do need to discount, because it's far easier to have that conversation with your accountant and for your accountant to say no than have the conversation later on with HMRC and a tax inspector. So what I would also say with you guys, when you're having conversations with your accountants and they do say no, they're saying no for the right reasons. Yeah. And they are protecting you, perhaps from yourself a little bit.
Fair enough. We're all naturally greedy, aren't we? In our own ways.
The thing is, though, if you've got a business, then you're already paying quite a lot of tax in various different places. So being able to claim things back in places where you can, it's a benefit of being in business, isn't it? Because some people might have an issue with you're in business, you can claim loads of stuff back, but actually being in business is quite risky. We are taking much more of a risk than someone who's an employee who can just go to work and get their salary paid every month. We've got to keep finding the work, haven't we? So there is an element of being in business that is more risky and it is more challenging. So having those little perks do actually help. It's just about you actually staying on the right side of reality when it comes to what you actually do with it.
And there are certain allowances within HMRC's guidelines that you can claim, so trivial benefits, or there may be an allowance for an annual event, or there may be an allowance for a use of home as office, which you may not necessarily receive if you were an employee. So there are some little perks and benefits like that.
Yeah, even down to you get an allowance for the heating that you use in your office, don't you? And so my house is it's really old and really cold. So I've gone back to my accountant and said, actually this amount of money that I've been allowed to allocate is almost ridiculous compared to what we actually are paying. And actually, when we went back and checked, we were allowed to have some more. So it's these little things really that I wouldn't have known what to do with on my own, but my accountant knows the answer. And I also think from an HMRC point of view is, you're right, it is scary, and there's a lot of things about it because it all feels so unknown and like a big void of our knowledge. But actually, they are quite human. And if you do get caught in a place, even the best of us get caught in, I have a very difficult situation moving from one business to another, which had some overlapping stuff that caused a lot of problems. And they immediately went, okay, let's split it down, let's pay it off over the course of a year. It's completely fine to do that. And as long as you are doing it, they're really open, I think. But then as long as they're getting paid, they quite often can be very open to, talking about stuff, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And they are very open to organising payment plans for taxes that may be due, be it corporation tax, be it self-assessment, etc. They would much rather keep a business in business than send it to the wall because all of a sudden they're being really demanding over a tax bill. And I've seen payment plans organised over 12, 18, 24 months. So we can manage that over a longer period of time. The worst things that you can do are enter into a payment plan and then breach it.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be doing that. So certainly if you do organise a payment plan, you want to make sure that it is affordable. The other worst thing that you can do is when the red letter comes, just ignoring it, because that's the point in time that you will find somebody knocking on your door.
And then they won't be quite so friendly.
They won't be quite so friendly, and they might want to take your telly.
Conclusion to all this then. I can claim my cat's iPhone. That's fine. That's what you said earlier, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely, James.
Excellent, good stuff. We are fast running out of time. We always like to finish by asking if you want to set any homework for our listeners. Before we do that, though, I've known you for a while, and I've seen you kind of give a few different sort of presentations and talks about what you do, and you always do this quite funny thing where you give some actual examples of things that people have tried to claim for in the past. So I'm going to ask you to do that as well, because I think that's a very nice way for us to wrap up. So yeah, examples of things that people have tried to put through their business in the past, and then any homework that you want to set, please.
Okay, so real examples that I have seen of people trying to claim. I have seen a individual try and claim mileage to the moon and back, equivalent distance. So that was quite humorous when I then said, "How old is your car?" He said 5 years old, and I said, "Well, I assume you've got an MOT certificate which justifies this mileage." He went a little bit quiet at that point in time. Somebody who decided that they were going on a business trip to Florida, which meant that his partner and all of the children had to go to Disney World, and we were going to claim for that. The classic example, which it's in the public domain, so I can't say it, and it's an MP, and he decided to claim a hairpiece through his business.
I think there's MPs claiming much worse than that, to be fair, isn't there?
Well,
we'll not go into that.
This is a family broadcast. That's on the outtakes.
Well, you've got to give them points for creativity.
Absolutely. Brill. So just to wrap up, anyone that's listening to this, particularly, we've not really talked about Steve, who's our kind of sample person who's starting out in business, but particularly someone that's kind of at the beginning of their business journey. Anything kind of practical that they can go away and do?
What they need to be doing is, if Steve's already in business, he needs to have a good grip on his profit and loss account. So he needs to be understanding how much he's making and where he's making it from. Mm-hmm. He needs to engage a good advisor so they can be proactive in telling him what taxes are due and when they are due, most importantly. And then as you get a little bit bigger and maybe you've got some liabilities such as VAT or you've got some assets, then a limited company definitely does need a balance sheet. So a balance sheet, what that would tell you is how much the business is worth and how much assets and liabilities are in the business at any one point in time. So that's important to understand as well, because we go back to the point of the money in the bank isn't necessarily your money. Mm-hmm. So the balance sheet generally will tell you how much is your money. So that's important to understand as well.
Brilliant. All right.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys.
Well, thank you for your attendance today. I hope you've learned something new. Every day is a business school day after all. If you'd like to contact us or perhaps put yourself forward as a future guest, find either Nicky or myself on LinkedIn, or you can drop us a line using the links in the show notes. Right, school is out. Please wait for the bell before you leave.